Hi everybody, this is Deborah Davidson and I'm the director of Prairie Urban Farm. I want to talk to you today about our 2020 season and what you can do to become a volunteer to help us out this year. Ordinarily, we would hold our volunteer orientation together in person, but this year, because of the coronavirus pandemic and restrictions on public gatherings, we've decided to go about it remotely. So bear with me. This is my first time using PowerPoint to record a presentation. So let's see how this goes. So first of all, who we are. We are a 1.5 acre collective and volunteer run community farm. We have a 5-member executive board to make all of the sorts of tough decisions that need to be made to keep our farm running. And we also have 16 mentors who help out during all of our work sessions to facilitate those sessions and to maintain communication with the rest of us and to answer questions. And of course, share in the asking of those questions as well. And then finally, most importantly, we have many volunteers. The numbers vary every year, but we typically have several dozen people who help us out each year, and we're hoping for even more this year. So just to give you a little bit of history and context, this will be our 7th season. And we are situated on the University of Alberta South campus. So we're affiliated with the university. Many of the members of our executive board and our volunteer crew are also members of the University of Alberta community. And this means that we respect the regulations and policies of the University of Alberta. And it also means that we appreciate the research and the education and the training priorities of the University of Alberta and attempt to replicate them on our own farm. So what you see in front of you here is sort of is a map of the University of Alberta South campus and where it is situated, broadly speaking, between Park Allen and Michener Park and Grandview Heights. But if we zero in, here's a closer map of where Prairie Urban Farm is located. And this also shows you how to get to Prairie Urban Farm. And by the way, you can also find us on Google Maps. So if you're coming from the LRT station, we are about a 10 to 15 minute walk from the LRT station to Prairie Urban Farm. It's basically a direct shot south from the LRT station, and then you turn right a couple blocks until you get to 118th Street, and then you'll turn left again, and you'll find us sitting right in front of the Dairy Research and Technology Center, which is a big white barn. There's a sign right in front of our plots in that area as well. You can also arrive by car or bicycle, and to do that, you typically come from 60th Avenue, which basically you catch right where 113th Street and 63rd Avenue meet. It's kind of a curve around there. It's a large boulevard, and I'm sure those of you who have been in Alberta or Edmonton for a while are familiar with it. Okay, so let's move on a little bit more in more detail about ecological management, because I know many people who come to Prairie Urban Farm have a particular interest in ecological management and trying to find ways to produce food in more ecologically beneficial ways. So to start with, our management decisions are guided by permaculture. Permaculture supports working with nature to build regenerative food production systems and healthy communities. Permaculture, rather than being a set rule list, I really particularly appreciate permaculture because it's a perspective. It's a set of guidelines through which you gauge all of the circumstances that you face when you're growing food and all of the decisions that need to be made. We do not use any chemicals, and we seek to manage our pests and weeds either manually, which is another reason why we need lots of volunteers, and with natural alternatives. And that could include everything from companion planting to sort of some natural sprays and things that we can use for certain kinds of pest outbreaks. We also seek to provide habitat for Edmonton's many wild plant and animal species. So that means that a number of the plants that we grow at our farm are not food plants. They're there for habitat. And it also means that once in a while we're willing to basically forego some of our harvest for the sake of some of the animal species that inhabit that area. So last year, for example, we had a pretty happy geese population that basically really enjoyed themselves in our brand new barley plot, and so we probably lost about a quarter of our harvest to the geese, and that's just part of working with nature. We also use as little irrigation water as is needed, and we minimize the use of tools and machinery that require fossil fuels. And then we also embrace and open discussions with you to encourage learning about how to grow food in an ecologically beneficial manner. And we recognize that there is no one single way to do things, and that everybody has a different level of knowledge and experience and perspective to share, and providing opportunities to share that diversity of knowledge and experience is one of the things that I value most about Prairie Urban Farm, and I think it's the best way to learn too. And so we continuously learn, which means we're constantly changing the things that we do through that knowledge sharing, but also just through observation, through watching our land change through the season and over the seasons. So everything that we have at Prairie Urban Farm was created by volunteers, and we're very, very lucky to have many skilled people who can share their knowledge in things like the trades. So the shed that we have on site, our compost bins, our raised beds, were all built by volunteers with the help of mentors who are skilled, who have the right skill sets for those things. All of our signage, for example, was also created by volunteers. And so our volunteers do a variety of activities, not just managing our crops. Okay, and then the next thing that I want to talk about is what do we do with all the food that we grow? So we distribute our harvests in three ways. The first one is we give to people in need by through many of the organizations that I just mentioned before. So here you see an example of a community kitchen where we contributed several boxes of food in previous years. The second place that our food goes is through sales. We have a weekly market, and this year, for the first time, we're also introducing a market box, a weekly market box for a handful of customers. And we raise those funds, or the money that we raise through those market activities, pays for the supplies, the things that that we need to keep going. And then the third point of distribution is you, through our volunteers. So many of our volunteers take home lots of food, and one of the things that I particularly enjoy is when volunteers are exposed to foods that they've never tried before, and this is their opportunity to try something new. We also share lots of recipes and cooking preparation advice at the farm as well, for those who are trying something for the first time. So here's just a sampling of the produce. We tend to produce a lot of food, although it does go quickly, and that's why we have to basically think carefully about how we want to distribute that food, and make sure that our food distribution is supporting our guiding principles of supporting our community. So here's an example of some of the ways that our money, the money that we generate in revenues from our markets, get spent. So in addition to paying for regular things like tools and seeds, we also used our proceeds to buy the materials to build our shed. And this year, we bought a brand new rototiller. We don't use rototillers, the rototiller very often, but it's really important when we do need it, and we're really happy to have be able to retire the old one that we've been trying to keep alive for the last several years. So let me tell you a little bit about our volunteer activities. So there's three basically different types of volunteer activities that we have at Prairie Urban Farm. First of all, we have regular sessions that are just focused on farm management. So that'll include everything from seeding to transplanting, watering and pest management, path maintenance, and cleaning and organizing. Secondly, we do hold a number of special work sessions throughout the season that are focused on particular projects. That might be anything from building a compost bin to creating a food orchard. We've got a couple of things on our wish list for particular projects this coming year. And then the third kind of regular activity is really about preparations for our markets. And those this year will be on Tuesdays and Saturdays. So that will be times that will be focused on harvesting and cleaning and packaging of produce, and particularly on Saturday, engaging with customers. So in terms of our regular activities, if you were to go out to the farm today, and I hope we have an opportunity to do that very soon, you'll see something like this, where you don't see a lot growing yet, but we do have some things growing now in many planter boxes in front of people's windows and under some grow lights. So these are all the seedlings that all of our volunteers, or several of our volunteers, have offered to grow for us this year, and they'll be ready to be planted soon. And so we'll end up very soon with something like this. This is last year's tomato orchard, or it actually is a bit of an orchard, but this is our tomato plot. So each of our tomato plants are transplanted and staked. And so it still looks pretty bare, but pretty soon we end up with a lot of greenery, and that means a lot of management needs out at the farm. And then pretty soon we will be harvesting, like these volunteers are doing with some fresh crops from, I think that was from last year. And before you know it, the snow's going to be flying, and we will still be out there. We never seem to be completely done before the snow flies. So last year we were out harvesting and doing a number of activities long after the first snow. So I just wanted to share with you a few of our plot management strategies, although the list is much longer and we continue to talk about these throughout the course of the season. But here's some basic some basic strategies that we pursue. What you see in front of you is basically a plot map, and you can see each of the colored sections, and so each of those sections will have something different growing in them. And so one of the first things that we do is we rotate crops. We rotate crops because, number one, if you grow the same crop in the same area more than 1 year in a row, you increase the chance of specific pests and diseases that overwinter in the soil to really get hold and basically ruin your crop for that year. Another reason is that some of our crops are heavier feeders than others, which means they suck more nutrients out of the soil. While yet other crops are quite gentle on the soil or even beneficial, like legumes. So we keep our crops rotated, and we also diversify our crops as much as we can in our prairie climate. We also work to minimize soil compaction, so we have lots of pathways out on the farm, and one of the main strategies of those pathways is to keep people from walking in the areas that are dedicated to growing food. We're always experimenting with new crops. And as I mentioned before, we integrate non-food species, both for wildlife habitat, but also there are a number of non-food species that are great for pest management and for pollinators, for attracting bees and other beneficial insects to the garden. So here's just an example of an experiment. Last year, for the first time, we grew a plot of barley, which was loads of fun. And we also decided to do everything by hand. And the spreading of seed was super easy by hand. But when it came time to harvest, we were out there basically cutting it all down with sickles and then threshing it by hand. It was quite an interesting experiment, but we had lots of people who had loads of fun and learned a ton about just exactly how much work is involved in producing food without the use of fossil fuels. We also learned lots of other things, like I mentioned, the geese really loved our barley plot. Um, and there's lots of other beneficial things that we got from our barley crop as well. Things like straw that we can use as ground cover in the coming year. Here's a picture of one of the crews that was involved in harvesting. And over the winter, we ended up with this. So um, much of that barley was dried and processed, and we made our very first batch of Prairie Urban Farm beer. Unfortunately, we can't sell it, but that's good news for volunteers who enjoy beer, because now we get to share it. And then our market activities involve weekly markets on Saturdays, and then a distribution of market boxes on Tuesdays. So in each of those days, we will be involved in, first of all, scanning our plots to sort of do an inventory of what's ready to harvest, and then harvesting and cleaning and presenting that produce. And then at the weekly market, interacting with people who come to visit the farm and participate in our market. We also, in the fall, at least in ordinarily, we have preserving sessions where we make tomato sauce and salsa and jams. I'm not sure that we'll be able to do that this year because of the limitations on public gatherings due to the coronavirus pandemic. But if we can't, then we will try to find ways to provide some instruction remotely, possibly through a PowerPoint like this, or maybe we'll do an online seminar for our volunteers. But that's always a lot of fun, and it's always also a great learning experience. I know that I learn something new every time we have a session, and it saves a lot of our produce, which can last, well, when you put it in a jar, it can last a number of years. I'm still working on some of our salsa from a couple of years ago. Okay, so if you're interested in volunteering for Prairie Urban Farm, here are some things that you need to know. Number one, there's no knowledge or experience that is required. We welcome people who are brand new to growing food, and we also welcome people who have been doing it all their lives. A couple of other things that I want to talk about in a little bit more detail are health and safety requirements, the things you need to bring with you, how we communicate, taking home produce, how our work sessions will be run, and how to sign up for a work session. So we're going to be instituting some new health and safety requirements for the 2020 season. Because of the coronavirus pandemic, which the University of Alberta has been taking very seriously, and so has the City of Edmonton and our province, we will be instituting some new health and safety requirements for the season. And since we had this opportunity to develop some health and safety requirements that were specific to keeping everybody healthy and safe during the coronavirus pandemic, we also decided to take this opportunity to participate in a full assessment and development of a health and safety plan. So some of the new requirements that we will be instituting this year aren't specific to the coronavirus pandemic. So first of all volunteers will need to sign a waiver before working on your first session at PUF. You only need to provide us with one waiver for the season, but we need to have that on hand before you can start. We will have printed copies available at the farm so that when you arrive, you can just sign them at your first session. And then we'll keep those on file. And the next session that you come, we'll just check to make sure we've got a form for you, and then you can get going. Secondly, all volunteers must practice social distancing. That means that you need to keep a minimum of 2 meters of distance between you and others in order to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Work sessions will also be limited to a maximum of 15 people. And those groups of people will be divided into smaller working groups, and each group will have a mentor. All volunteers must bring their own work gloves and a mask for use when social distancing is not possible. We used to have, as many returning volunteers will remember, a bin of work gloves on site that people shared. But given the risk of sharing the coronavirus through shared work gloves, we thought it would be best if everyone just brought their own and then took their own work gloves back home with them. And will require you to bring a mask. You don't necessarily have to wear it all the time, but there might be occasions in which it's just impossible to keep 2 meters between everyone. So for example, when you're harvesting, or maybe when there's a sudden thunderstorm and we all dive for cover under the awning. So in those cases, um, if everyone has masks, that will keep us all from sharing the coronavirus in case anyone is infected. All sessions will have one mentor serving as a health and safety designate, and so that person will identify themselves at the beginning of the session. And that just means if anything goes wrong, if there's any accidents, that would be the person you let know right away what happened, and then they will take whatever measures are necessary at that point. There will be additional instructions for ensuring safety when harvesting and cleaning produce in particular provided on site. And volunteers may not come to the farm to work outside of mentored work sessions. I know in the past we've been very informal and many people have come sort of at their leisure to work at the sessions, but in order to be able to ensure um, uh, uh, that we follow all of these regulations, we're going to have to prevent that from happening. We will, however, this year be expanding our regular work hours, the regular work sessions that we will be holding in order to accommodate as many people as we can, and have as varied a work schedule as we can. Okay, so some things that you need. As I already mentioned, what you will be required to provide in order to work on site will be work gloves and a face mask. Other things that we strongly recommend are water. You should bring plenty of water to stay hydrated. You should have some sturdy closed-toed shoes, and particularly shoes that aren't your favorite, or it can be rinsed off like these rubber boots that you see in the picture here, because it can get pretty dirty and muddy out there. And we'd also strongly recommend you bring a sun hat, although that's of course your choice. Okay, so how do we communicate? Our main form of communication is by email. So if you haven't already, please sign up to be on our email list, and you can find that sign up sheet just at our webpage at prairieurbanfarm.ca. There's a link there that you can go to in order to sign up. We also use this Slack app for additional communications and information sharing. And so you can sign up for your Slack site here. I will also be sharing this this webpage address by email as well, so you can just copy and paste it into your browser. And then you can also follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and I certainly hope that you do. Okay, and then the next thing I want to talk about is taking home produce. So we love to reward our volunteers with fresh produce when it's ready to harvest, and sometimes we can get pretty impatient for when it's ready to harvest. Um, but we should have at least some spring greens and some herbs fairly early in the season. But we also love to be able to provide produce to people in need, and we will need to ensure that we have sufficient produce for our market in order to generate funds to support the farm. So at the end of each session, time will be set aside for harvesting, but volunteers are not permitted to come to the farm and harvest at other times. So what does a typical work session look like? Well, after you've signed up, you arrive at the farm at the beginning of each work session. Then you'll check in at the shed with your mentors where you'll talk about tasks for the day, and then you'll break up into groups. And of course, you can take a break at any time, but mentors will also encourage regular breaks to cool off and hydrate, particularly given that it can get pretty hot out there. And then at the end of the session, we're going to ask everyone to please clean the tools that you've used. And this will include, this year, bleaching the handles. We will have some bleach and some cloths on hand at the farm for that purpose. And then return them to the shed. Then you'll have some time to harvest for your own personal consumption. And we'll encourage you too to take note of any interesting observations you've made during your session in our observation journal. This is something new that we're gonna try this year. I always love hearing other people's experiences and the things that they've noted when they're out at the farm, particularly since sometimes they're things that I wouldn't have caught myself. And as I mentioned earlier, one of the principles of permaculture is learning through observation. So taking the time to get to know our farm, what changes over the year, where we're seeing new kinds of activities, or just the kinds of observations that you can make could be purely on a social level as well. So the sharing of new information that you heard from somebody you just met at the farm could be another example. So we'll have a journal on site, and we really encourage you to participate and contribute to our observations journal this year. And hopefully at the end of the year we can compile all that information and then share it back with you. Okay, so important information that's new for this year: how to sign up for a work session. So in order to abide by our maximum allowable group size, we're going to have to require that volunteers sign up for each work session. So we'll be using Eventbrite for this purpose. So work sessions for each week will be finalized on Sunday evenings. So you can go to just puf.eventbrite.com to sign up. And while you're there, we recommend that you hit the follow button in order to receive regular notices of updates. And there's where you can sign up for each work session, and you can sign up for more than one session at once. But the number of slots available will be limited for each session in order to basically ensure that we're not exceeding our maximum allowable work time, or work size, pardon me. That also means that if you sign up and then you later realize that you're not going to be able to make it, we ask you to please cancel your ticket. So here is what Eventbrite's sign-up sheet looks like. The information that you see in here is just sort of a set of example work bees. So these aren't actually work bees that will be taking place. So what you can see here is just below our sort of our regular information, you have a listing of all events. So this is where you'll see all of the events, or all of basically the work sessions that we'll have each week. And for each one, there will be a maximum amount of tickets available based on the maximum allowable work size and the number of mentors that we have available. So all you have to do is click on the icon, and then you'll enter your name, and then you go on the list as one of the volunteers for that work session. You will also receive reminders from Eventbrite of your session as well. Okay, that is it. I want to thank you for your interest in Prairie Urban Farm. And I hope to see you out at the farm. And in the meantime, if you have any more questions, you can contact me by email at deborah.davidson@ualberta.ca. You can also go to our webpage. We're hoping to start up very soon. As soon as our first work session is scheduled, we will send an announcement around and encourage everybody to head over to Eventbrite to sign up. Thanks again, and I'll see you soon.